Pack your things and get out of my house. My husband's voice didn't even shake when he said it. No hesitation. No pause. Just those 8 words, delivered like he was reading from a grocery list, while my mother-in-law stood behind him with her arms crossed and a small, satisfied smile on her face. I was 31 years old. I was standing in the kitchen of the house I had helped pay for, holding a dish towel, and my husband of 4 years was telling me to leave. "You're embarrassing this family," he said. "You always have been." My mother-in-law. I had always called her by her first name because she insisted, though it never once felt like warmth. Nodded slowly. "Gwendolyn," she said, looking at me, "the way you look at something unpleasant you've found at the bottom of a bag. You are not what we expected for our son." I didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue about. We had been having different versions of this conversation for 4 years, and I was tired. I took my things. I left. 18 months later, they walked into my restaurant on its opening night. My name is Gwendolyn Marsh, and until I was 23 years old, I had never considered myself anything other than ordinary. I grew up in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place where everyone knew your parents' jobs and had opinions about your future before you'd had a chance to form any of your own. My father worked at a logistics company. My mother taught middle school science. We were comfortable, not wealthy. And they had always been proud of me in the quiet, steady way parents are when they don't feel the need to announce it. I moved to Nashville when I was 22 for a job at a small food distribution company. I had a business degree, a used Honda Civic, and a folder of notes I had been keeping since I was 19. Observations about restaurants, menus, pricing structures, service models, gaps in markets I had noticed while eating out with my family or reading industry. Reports I had no professional reason to be studying. Nobody knew about that folder. It wasn't something I talked about. I met my husband at a friend's dinner party. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming in their late 20s. Confident, a little performative, the kind of person who tells stories that center himself without appearing to. His family owned a chain of hardware stores across Tennessee and had a very specific idea of what success looked like. Something tangible, something established, something that could be pointed to at Thanksgiving. I was in food distribution. That was fine, they decided. Practical. Respectable enough. What I didn't mention, not at first, was that I was quietly building something on the side. For 3 years while I worked my day job, I spent my evenings and weekends developing a concept for a restaurant. Not a diner, not a chain, a mid-sized American bistro with a specific focus on locally sourced ingredients and a rotating seasonal menu. I had a business partner, a woman named Frances. I had met through a culinary networking event, who handled the operational and kitchen side, while I focused on the financing and business model. We met every Saturday morning at a coffee shop near my apartment and worked for hours. I had spreadsheets. I had a detailed investor presentation. I had projections that I revised obsessively. My husband knew I was interested in the restaurant industry. That's how I had described it, because every time I tried to explain further, something in his expression shifted. A slight tightening, a polite half-nod that said he was listening the way people listen when they've already made up their minds. His mother was less polite about it. "The restaurant business is where money goes to die," she told me once at dinner. Not as an aside, directly at me across the table, while the rest of the family continued eating. 90% of them fail within the first year. Did you know that? I said I did know that, actually, and that I had been studying the industry for years. She smiled. "Studying," she repeated, "the way you repeat a word when you find it slightly absurd." My husband said nothing. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I would show them. The problem was, I kept telling myself that while also telling myself it wasn't the right time to share what we'd actually accomplished. We had a location. We had investors. We had a contractor working on the build-out. But every time I came close to saying any of it out loud at a family dinner, something stopped me. Not fear exactly. More like the exhaustion of knowing I would have to defend something I hadn't finished yet to people who had already decided it would fail. So I stayed quiet. And staying quiet, as it turned out, made it easy for them to keep talking. The comments built over time the way these things do, slow. At first, his mother wondering aloud why I didn't apply for a management position at the distribution company so we could at least start saving for a house. His father, quiet, mostly, but when he spoke it landed. Mentioning over the 4th of July cookout that it was good my husband had a stable career because somebody in the marriage needed to anchor things. My husband, to his credit, didn't always agree out loud. But he didn't disagree either, and silence, I learned, has a way of becoming endorsement. The Sunday before he asked me to leave, we had his family over for dinner. I had made everything from scratch. Braised short ribs, a green bean salad with toasted almonds and lemon vinaigrette, roasted fingerling potatoes, a peach tart for dessert. I spent most of Saturday preparing. His mother looked around the table and said, "This is lovely." Then, to my husband, "She would have made a good caterer." I smiled. I cleared the plates. I went to the kitchen. My husband followed me in. "She means it as a compliment," he said. "I know," I said. "You're being sensitive." I stopped. I turned around. "I'm not being sensitive. I've been building something for 3 years, and no one in your family has once asked about it directly. Your mother just implied my highest potential is catering. I'm not being sensitive." He stared at me for a moment. Then he said, "This is exactly what I mean." "What you mean about what?" He exhaled slowly. "You make everything so complicated." We didn't fight that night. We moved around each other quietly until everyone left, and then we went to bed without talking, and for a few days it felt like it might just pass the way things sometimes pass, but something had shifted, and I think we both knew it. The following Sunday, his parents came back. I wasn't sure why. It felt planned, though no one said so. His mother made a comment during lunch about a friend's daughter who had just made partner at a law firm in Atlanta. His father nodded. My husband said, "That's great for her." Then his mother looked at me. "And what's the update on your little project?" I set down my fork. "It's not a little project. We've secured funding, the location is in build-out, and we're targeting an opening in 14 months. There was a brief silence. His mother tilted her head. "Funding from whom?" "Investors," I said. "I've been working with a business partner for 3 years. It's a legitimate business." She smiled at my husband. He did not smile back at me. "Gwendolyn," she said carefully, like she was choosing each word for maximum effect. "This is exactly why we've been concerned. You've been spending years chasing something that statistically will not succeed, instead of building a real foundation with our son. This is not what we expected for our family." I said, "I think what you mean is it's not what you expected for your son." The table went very quiet. She said, "Same thing." My husband looked at his mother, then at me, and in that look I understood something I had been avoiding understanding for a long time. I was not on his side of the table. I had never been on his side of the table. That night, after his parents left, he told me to pack my things and get out. I asked him if he was serious. He said, "You've been keeping secrets and playing house with some fantasy business while I've been trying to build a real life. I don't know who you are." I said, "You never asked." He said, "That's not fair." I said, "It's the truest thing I've said in 4 years." I stayed at my friend Petra's apartment for 6 weeks while I sorted out the legal side of things. My husband and I had no children, which made the divorce relatively straightforward. We sold the house, split it cleanly, and moved on. What I did not do was call and explain myself. I did not send a message saying, "By the way, here's proof that I'm not a failure." I did not need them to understand. I understood, and that was finally enough. I threw everything into the restaurant. Francis and I had been working toward a downtown Nashville location, a 2-story space in the Gulch neighborhood that had previously been a struggling wine bar. High ceilings, exposed brick, large front windows. We spent 11 months doing the build-out, hiring staff, training, and refining the menu. I barely slept. I ate dinner, standing at the prep counter, more nights than I can count. I drove home at 2 in the morning and woke up at 6 with my phone already full of messages. It was the most exhausted I had ever been and the most alive I had ever felt. We named the restaurant Thicket. The concept was new American comfort food with a rotating seasonal menu. The kind of food that felt familiar but was made with an obsessive attention to quality and sourcing. Every protein came from within 200 miles. Our produce rotated based on what was actually in season in Tennessee, not what was available on a commodity market. We worked with 12 local farms. We had 48 seats and a 12-seat bar. We opened on a Wednesday in October. By Friday, we had a wait list. By the following Saturday, a food critic from the Nashville scene had come in unannounced and stayed for 2.5 hours. The review ran the following Thursday. Thicket is the rare restaurant that feels inevitable. Like it was always supposed to exist and you simply hadn't found it yet. I read it sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store at 7 in the morning and cried for about 4 minutes. Then I went inside and bought $300 of produce because we had run out of butternut squash. The weeks after the review were a blur of controlled chaos. Reservations filled weeks out. We added a private dining room. Francis hired 2 additional line cooks. A regional food magazine reached out about a profile. A hotel group in Brentwood called to discuss a potential partnership. I was sleeping 5 hours a night and still felt more grounded than I had in years. I had told almost no one outside of my direct team and my parents, who had known the whole time and never stopped believing in it, even when I was too tired to believe in it myself. His family did not know. There was no reason for them to. That is, until October 24th. Thicket had been open for 3 weeks when my former mother-in-law made a reservation. She didn't make it under her own name. She used a friend's name, which I only learned later, and she came with my former father-in-law and 2 other couples I didn't recognize. A Friday night. 8 o'clock. One of our busiest services. I was in the back reviewing a produce order when my floor manager, a steady, unflappable man named Devin, who had worked the front of house at 3 Nashville institutions before coming to us, leaned into the kitchen. "Table 6, he said quietly. "I think you might know them." I came out from behind the line. They were seated near the windows, studying the menus. My former mother-in-law was wearing a cream blazer and had her hair done the way she always did, for occasions she considered important. Her husband was leaning back in his chair with the particular ease of someone who is accustomed to being comfortable anywhere. They had not seen me yet. I stood near the service station for a moment. My heart was doing something complicated. Not anger. That had been gone for a long time. More like a strange, quiet steadiness. I thought about walking back to the kitchen. I thought about sending Devin to handle the table. I thought about a lot of things in about 12 seconds. Then I walked over. She looked up first, and I watched the exact moment her face changed. It was not a dramatic change. No jaw drop, no gasp. Her face simply went very still. The way a face goes still when the brain is trying to catch up to something it wasn't prepared for. Her husband turned. His expression was harder to read, somewhere between surprise and something that might have been, if I looked closely enough, a kind of reluctant recognition. "Gwendolyn," she said. "Just my name. Nothing else." "Welcome to Thicket," I said. I kept my voice warm, the way I try to keep it with every table. "I'm glad you found us." There was a silence. One of the women at the table, a friend of theirs, I assumed, someone I'd never met, smiled politely, unaware of anything happening beneath the surface. "You own this restaurant?" my former father-in-law asked. He said it the way you ask a question when you already suspect the answer, but need to hear it confirmed. "I do," I said. "My business partner Francis and I opened 3 weeks ago." He looked around the room, at the full tables, at the servers moving efficiently through a packed service, at the handwritten menu cards and the low amber lighting, and the flowers Francis's sister arranged fresh every 2 days. And I watched him look at all of it. And I knew exactly what he was calculating, because I had watched him calculate things before. His wife opened her mouth and closed it again. I said, "Devin will be taking care of you tonight. Everything on the menu is good, but if you've never tried the roasted beet salad, I'd start there. Enjoy your dinner." I nodded once and went back to the kitchen. Devin found me 10 minutes later. "Table 6 is very quiet," he said. "That's fine," I said. "Make sure they have everything they need." They stayed for 2.5 hours. They ordered most of the menu. They ordered dessert. They left a large tip and no note, and Devin reported that my former mother-in-law had asked him, toward the end of the meal, how long I had been working on the restaurant. He told her 3 years. She nodded, Devin said, and looked at her plate for a long moment. I was not there for that. I had moved on to prep for the following day's service before they left. 3 days later, I got a text from a number I still had in my phone, under a name I almost never thought about anymore. My former husband. "I heard you opened a restaurant," Mom told me. "Congratulations, Gwen." I looked at it for a while. Then I put the phone face down on the prep counter and went back to what I was doing. I didn't respond that day. I didn't respond the next day either. About a week later, my former mother-in-law called my personal number. I still don't entirely know how she had it. I suspect Frances's contact information was on our website, and she found a way from there. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was, by any measure, more than I expected. She said she and my father-in-law had been thinking about the dinner. She said the food was remarkable. She said, and this was the part I played twice, that she understood now that she had not asked the right questions when she had the chance. She said she hoped I was well. She did not say she was sorry. Or, she did, technically. She said, "I'm sorry we didn't know." But that's a different sentence from, "I'm sorry for what I said." I noticed the difference. I thought about calling back for a few days. I thought about what I would say if I did. I thought about all the Sunday dinners, and the tilted smiles and the comments delivered like they were just practical observations and not small, deliberate diminishments. I wrote a text that I edited for a long time. "Thank you for coming in. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm doing well." That was it. I sent it. I put the phone in my bag and went back to work. Frances found me later that afternoon standing in the walk-in cooler, which is where I go sometimes when I need 2 minutes of quiet. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, yeah." She handed me a clipboard. We had a meeting with a potential private dining client in 40 minutes. A corporate group looking to book monthly team dinners for Q1. I took the clipboard. I reviewed the notes. I went into the meeting. We booked the client. I want to be accurate about how the months that followed actually felt. Because the version of this story where everything becomes simple and triumphant after a single vindication scene is not the true version. The truth is that I thought about my former mother-in-law's voicemail more than I expected to. Not because I was angry, but because the feeling it left behind was complicated. Something between relief and a tiredness I didn't have language for. The relief was real. The part where she had seen the restaurant and understood that she had been wrong was genuinely something I had imagined. In moments of honesty, wanting her to see it and know. That impulse doesn't disappear just because you've built something real. But it also didn't feel the way I had imagined it would feel. I had expected it to feel like a door closing. Instead, it felt more like setting something heavy down. Not dramatic, just the absence of weight. My ex-husband sent one more message about a month later. He said he wanted to get coffee sometime and catch up. I sat with that message for almost a week. Then I replied, "I don't think that would be useful for either of us. I hope you're doing well." He didn't write back. The restaurant had a strong first year by any measure. We were nominated for a Regional Emerging Restaurant Award. We didn't win. But Frances pointed out that being nominated in our first year was the actual achievement, and she was right. We were fully booked through the holiday season. I hired a general manager and finally started sleeping more than 5 hours a night. I bought a condo in East Nashville in the spring. A 2-bedroom with exposed brick and a kitchen that was, if I'm being honest, a little embarrassing for someone who owned a restaurant. Small, modest, the kind of kitchen that says the owner does most of her serious cooking somewhere else. I liked it anyway. I sat on the living room floor the first night with a bowl of cereal and a beer, and felt, for the first time in a long time, very simply at home. My parents drove up from Columbus for the opening of the private dining room expansion. My father shook Devin's hand and told him the fried chicken was the best he'd had since my grandmother's, which from him is the highest possible praise. My mother sat at the bar and ordered a glass of Riesling and looked around the room with an expression I recognized from childhood. Quiet, steady pride. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. At the end of the night, she hugged me for a long time and said, "I always knew." I said, "I know you did." That meant more than the voicemail. That meant more than the text from my ex-husband and the large tip and the long silence at table 6 and all of it. Because it came from people who had known me the whole time and believed it anyway. Before there was a review or a waitlist or a room full of satisfied strangers. When I was still just a person with a folder full of notes, and a Saturday morning routine, and a vision I was holding carefully, quietly, mostly to myself. There is a version of this story where the point is the revelation scene, where my former mother-in-law walks into thicket, and my former husband texts to say congratulations, and everything feels resolved, clean, finished. But I have found, in the time since, that those moments are not the point. They are data, evidence, a kind of external confirmation that the thing you built is real. But the building itself, that was the point. The Saturday mornings with Francis. The spreadsheet I revised 40 times. The night we got the keys to the space and stood in an empty room that smelled like old wine and dry wall and possibility, and I said out loud, for the first time, "We're actually doing this." And Francis said, "We actually are." That was the point. I don't need my ex-husband's family to understand who I am. They had years to ask, and they chose not to. The time for that has passed, and that is not a tragedy. It is just the shape of things. What I know now is this. I stopped needing their approval somewhere around the time I started pouring everything I had into something I believed in. And by the time they walked into my restaurant on a Friday night in October and sat down at table 6 and ordered the beet salad and looked around a room that I had built from a folder of notes and 3 years of Saturday mornings, by then their opinion had become, very quietly, beside the point. The most honest moment of that whole night was not when she said my name, or when he looked around the room doing the math, or even when I walked back to the kitchen and Devin gave me the small nod that said everything was fine. The most honest moment was later, after service, when Francis and I sat at the bar with 2 glasses of wine, and the front door locked, and the last of the kitchen staff heading out, and neither of us said anything for a while, and the quiet felt like exactly enough.